Welcome to the Admin 101 World Languages series, developed specifically for administrators who need information that's quick for world languages K through 12. I'm Dr. Laura Roche Youngworth, a former middle school and high school French teacher and specialist for world languages in Fayette County Public Schools in Lexington, Kentucky.
I'm Jean Marie Rouillet-Willoughby. I am a professor of Russian in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages, Literatures, and Cultures at the University of Kentucky. And I've been at Kentucky for 22 years now and came in as a teacher, particularly specializing in excellence in language education, which is what I have dedicated my career to.
In this episode, we're going to work with the most basic thing, how to start, how to kick off a world language program. What are the questions you need to consider before you make the final choices? So we're going to go through major questions with you, Jean Marie and myself. So let's get started. And Jean Marie, first question. What are the advantages for having a world language program in a school?
The advantages are many in offering your students the opportunity to do a world language. We can basically categorize them into two broad areas. The first, cognitive and academic, and the second, social and global. In terms of cognitive and academic, people have been studying the effect on the brain and on learning broadly of world languages in all kinds of formats, both the traditional classroom to immersion to full bilingual education since the 1960s, mainly because our schools started introducing programs like these. When the schools started introducing programs like these, people wanted to see what effect this had on students' development. Because every time you add, as we all know, a new subject or a new way of approaching the subject, it can have effects across the curriculum. So in terms of cognitive and academic skills, the research has shown that higher order thinking is improved by doing language education, particularly from elementary school on. So problem-solving skills that require people to reason out cause and effect and solve complex problems are improved. Interestingly, in addition to all the benefits of improving literacy skills across the board, so that there's evidence that what happens is a student takes the material from the second language and applies it to the first and becomes more cognizant about grammatical structures, which improves literacy skills, reading and writing in both languages, but also it improves math skills. Standardized testing of students who do consistent language education from an early age indicate that the scores are higher for those who do languages in both math and reading. In addition, it improves college readiness, not only because many universities, of course, have requirements for language of students coming in, but also because they are doing better on standardized testing across the board, both ACT and SAT, as a result of their exposure to language. At the end of the podcast, we'll be giving you some information about places where you can access studies of these kind so that you can see how and what the benefits are and how they might affect the students in your schools.
Okay.
In terms of social and global, social, of course, is particularly obvious in that language is a tool as well as an academic discipline, a tool that allows you to bridge gaps between people who speak other languages. As a result, interpersonal skills are developed. An increase in respect of people who speak other languages is documented, and people are more willing to try to communicate across so-called cultural divides. In terms of the global skills, we have, of course, the sense of interconnectedness with people in other parts of the globe, as well as global competence skills in professional and personal life. Global competence in terms of being able to work in international companies or international settings or with people from other cultures, and also personally being able to interact with these people who are present in your community and who need some support. By having a world language education at your school, then, you basically expand the ability for the students to be able to communicate with each other, for you to be able to communicate with parents who lack the English that's necessary to discuss with you matters pertaining to their child's education. And you also have an educator who's been trained to think globally, who understands and implements pedagogy that's similar to that learned by ESL teachers. So a world language educator is a great resource for the entire faculty in guiding them in helping ELL or ELP students as well.
And especially with many schools, their mission statement says for a global society or to excel in the world, and that would be a really good resource of someone to have on your faculty to help that mission statement come to fruition. So, are we ready for next question?
Yes.
Okay, question 2. Here you go. Question 2 is the big question. Which language? This is the question that most people want to jump to first. So which language should you offer, or languages, at your school? Now, there's a lot of debate as to how many languages in the world. The Linguistic Society estimates 6,900 distinct languages. Ethnologue estimates 7,100 distinct languages, so we'll go with 7,000. Out of 7,000 languages to choose from, we think any language is a good language. It doesn't matter which one you choose, but it does matter. It matters to the students, it matters to your community, it matters to the bigger picture. So let's go through some facts. So when we do this we might want to look at how many people in the world speak the language. So Jean Marie's going to write up some languages we're going to talk about. One language we're not going to talk about is Spanish. Rarely do administrators need convincing that Spanish is needed in the United States because we see it all around us. So we're going to target languages other than Spanish that you might also want to consider for your world language program. So let's go through. Arabic. In the world, we have roughly 280 million people that speak Arabic. Chinese has 935 million. Now there's different versions, dialects of Chinese. We have to keep that in mind. But 935 million is a lot of people. French, you have 75 million people who speak French. German, 92 million. Japanese, 125 million. Russian, 160 million. And then you have Latin. Now Latin, they say, is a dead language, but it is still used in many situations, and it is the official language of the Vatican. So when we get down to this, and we've looked at the world, now look at the United States. And how many people in the United States speak Arabic and Chinese? So the numbers get a little bit smaller, logically. Arabic, we have a little less than 1 million people in the United States that speak Arabic. Chinese, almost 3 million. That's a large number. French has about 1.3 million that speak it. German is a little over 1 million throughout the United States. Japanese is almost 500,000 who speak it. And Russian, we have roughly almost 1 million who speak Russian in the United States. Now, we need to narrow this down even further. In your community or your state, what languages are you seeing around you? And this is going to be unique to every area. So, for example, in Lexington, Kentucky, we have the 4th largest Congolese population. Thus, they're speaking French. And that might be a need for our schools. Now, next, the last component on choosing which language, do consider the student's interest. You'll be amazed what you as an adult think and what a high schooler wants to take. It's two different things. You might not be thinking of Arabic, but you're going to have kids around you who see things on the news and they're like, I want to speak Arabic. I want to work for the FBI someday, and that's a critical language for our country. So do take in mind what the student's interests are, because I bet you'll be shocked it's not coinciding with yours. And they're the people that have to study it. They're the ones who are going to continue with the language, so they've got to want to take that language. So Jean Marie, what's our third question?
One of the things to add about this question of student motivation is the research shows that there are 2 different types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. As a result, intrinsic motivation is what brings the students to the language. That could be heritage. So in Minnesota, Swedish might be very interesting for the students because of heritage reasons. There are also extrinsic motivations that are what's going on in the world, like Laura just talked about in terms of Arabic. As a result, you also have to think about what focus your school might have. If you have some kind of thematic topic, be it science, for example, or humanities or arts, different languages have different functions in terms of cultural and scientific literacy. So these are all questions that come into the equation. But of course, the third question is, can I find a teacher? What's the availability of the world language teachers of these various languages? Because we obviously are concerned about having quality instruction in the language, not just simply a speaker of the language, because speaking a language and teaching a language are two very different things. So where do you start? Well, you start by looking at which universities in the state and or surrounding region, depending on how far you want to draw your boundary, have accreditation programs and in which languages. For example, at the University of Kentucky, we offer accreditation programs in 9 of the 10 languages that we teach. You might also investigate visiting teacher programs. Visiting teacher programs are agreements between often a State Department of Education, although not exclusively, but often a State Department of Education and teachers from a particular region. So they are trained teachers who are coming from that country, be it China, Spain, Japan, etc. And that exchange allows you the opportunity to have a teacher in your classroom who's well trained. And then finally, there may also be State Department programs of a similar kind, that is at the national level, that in an effort to develop particularly skills in the critical languages, the so-called critical languages, that are important for national security, be it Arabic, Chinese, or Russian, and Spanish to some extent. These languages might be something that the State Department is bringing people in. The most important thing is that funding is not the only question, because many of these teachers are very inexpensive because of these agreements. And the expense of a world language educator should not prevent you from reaching out and offering as multiple languages if possible at your school. There are ways to do this on a limited budget, which we all recognize.
Jean Marie, are any of these languages critical languages in the United States?
Yes.
Which
Arabic
ones?
is, Chinese is, Russian is. And then there are critical languages also that are on the surface would not seem to be critical because they are not in sensitive political areas. That if you look at France, you say, oh, well, you know, we don't need that as a critical language. However, because French is spoken in, for example, Africa, in certain countries where there are issues, or in the Caribbean, that are of relevance to national security, French and for that reason Spanish is considered to be critical depending on where the person wants to work. If they want to work in France, no, but if they want to work in North Africa or in Latin America, certainly.
And then when we get to 3 languages listed here, Jean Marie mentioned the themes a school might have. So if you're a STEM school, if you're an arts school, some of these languages might be very helpful, international school and so on. So German is often a language that's great for if you're going into engineering. Japanese, if you're going to, along with Chinese, if you're going to do something that's international and trading and so on, economics, that might be good. I know French is often used as an international business language. Latin gives you foundational understanding. I think that's one of the most powerful things Latin can give you, is it lets the kids understand more fully their own language and just kind of the roots that come from it. It's very powerful. Now, question 4. What are the goals of your world language program? Now, when I say goals, I mean the proficiency goals. And this is a really important question to consider. Now, one thing we have to understand in order to talk about your proficiency goals for the program is this inverted pyramid. And this is how always language proficiency is referred to. As you move up the pyramid, it takes more time. So a student might get stuck there for a while. It looks like they're not growing, but they are. It's just more skills they need to have. Now within this pyramid, we have levels. We have the novice level, we have the intermediate level, we have the advanced level, and then the top 2 levels are levels that your students will not hit, but we're going to go on and share them. We have the superior and the distinguished. Again, students K through 12 will not hit those levels, and very few will hit up here, and we'll talk about that. Now let's go down to novice. Novice speakers of a language are speakers who can do the most basic things on very familiar topics. So they have these memorized phrases, rote phrases that they can use. They can handle any situation that's real familiar to them, that they practice a lot in the language classroom. As they get up higher on the novice level, they're starting to be able to create with the language. Someone who studies a language for 2 years, let's say in high school, often they're right here. You might have, just phenomenal students who bump up to the next level, but 2 years is what you get usually from this. Now, if we go to the intermediate level, this is always a goal I have for my students when I was teaching high school or middle school. Intermediate students are students who can create with the language. Thus, they can put their own thoughts together. The other thing an intermediate level language learner can do is they can ask and answer questions. And think about a conversation. I'm not having one with you, but if you were here, we would be asking questions back and forth. That would be intermediate. The way I'm putting my sentences together, I'm creating, that's intermediate. So an intermediate speaker can actually handle very marketable jobs. They can maybe be a sales clerk or do any position that's very, I don't want to say repetitive, but it's very predictable, the conversation they're going to have with somebody. And those would be jobs a lot of our graduating seniors would want to have. So it's a really good skill for them to have an intermediate level language ability. Now, as we go into advanced takes more time. Let's go back to intermediate. You probably need about 4 years of high school language study, or you need that middle school program flowing in to get your kids to the high level of intermediate. Without that, it's going to be very challenging to get your students that high of a proficiency level. When we hit advanced, you need a K through 12 program. Again, advanced is often a goal of immersion programs that start in K. Advanced is often the level that a college can get their students who are majoring in the language. Often advanced is that goal, somewhere in that level. Now, advanced, if you're at that level, you can talk about a large, wide range of topics. You can also talk about things in the past. You can talk about things that are happening right now, and you can talk about things that will happen in the future. So they have those time frames they can use. Finally, a big indicator of advanced is if they are in a situation, they can handle a complication that arises. So think about if someone's at an airport buying a ticket, intermediate skill, to take a flight somewhere, but that plane's booked. They're going to have to choose another flight. That kicks you into that advanced language skill. Again, we won't get into the superior and distinguished because that would be past our skill level for our students. But those are aspiring goals of anyone who's learning a world language. So what would be your goal for your language program? Again, I highly recommend targeting that intermediate level. Or if you have a K through 12 program and it's immersion based, we love to see someone in the advanced level.
The other thing to remember is, as a person who studies Russian, is that the State Department has ranked the difficulty of languages for native speakers of English. And those languages that are often critical, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian, take longer and are higher level difficulty for native speakers of English. So as a result, it takes longer to get to intermediate if you are, for example, doing Russian or Arabic than it would if you were doing, say, French, German, or Spanish. However, one of the interesting factors is that people often in languages like French, German, and Spanish plateau at intermediate and are at intermediate for longer stages, and the transition to advanced is actually more quick for those doing Russian and Arabic than it is for those doing German, French, and Spanish. So Spanish is often said to be an easier language. It's easier to make progress early on, but it's actually a little bit more difficult and people tend to stall. So you have to keep that in mind.
Good point.
More contact and more time is required to get certain people doing certain languages like Russian to intermediate than in French or Spanish.
And a study I saw a long time ago, which I thought was really interesting, was Spanish, the pronunciation is one of the easiest for English speakers to pick up. And the study was showing French and Spanish comparison, where French can be a little difficile, but the grammar of French was easier to pick up than the Spanish. So every language has its quirks to learning it. You just have to push for time with the students. And that gets us to our fifth question. So our fifth question is your school schedule. How will the schedule you have at your school work with language learning? And real quickly, I'm just going to go through these. If you are a K through 5 K through 5 administrator, and you're thinking of maybe languages being in a special rotation. Thus, the students will get the language once every 5 days. That's one of the worst things you can do. It is what it is. It's one of the worst things you can do. So we talk about duration, and we talk about the length of time. So frequency and length of time you have with the students. And I've had a lot of administrators say, well, at my school, these students do get Spanish for 60 minutes a week. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. How many times a week? And they're like, 1. Well, a little kindergartner can't pick up language real well if it's all thrown at them in one 60-minute session and then remember it for 5 days later. So really think about how you can put the language into your school schedule. If we're talking middle school or high school, if we have year-long classes that meet every day, let's say 50 minutes or so, that is, I'm going to say, optimal for language learning. So we've got that frequency. It's happening every day or very often on a consistent basis. And then you've got a chunk of time, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, somewhere in there. That's a wonderful chunk of time usually to learn a language. It allows the kids to flow up consistently and knock through those plateaus that might happen. If you are a high school, maybe that's on a block schedule. So maybe you have a B block or 4x4. We all have our terms for this modified block and so on. Think carefully, because if a student's on AB, they're learning something one day, not learning it second day, having to come back, it poses a little bit of challenge, just like it would for any content area. It's a little bit of a hindrance for language learning, but not something to keep language out of your program. You just need to think about that. The one block schedule that kind of makes me go, uh-oh, is the 4x4. You would think that would be beautiful, and it is, because you get the kids every day for a semester, for let's say level 1. But make sure they get level 2 the next semester. If they have to sit off a whole semester and then come back next year, wow, you're going back. They've fallen back down. And again, I know that's a problem for any content area, but it just hits languages really hard. So think about your schedule and how it can work. If you have a modified block schedule, you've got those year-long classes in there that may be band once or math once. That's a wonderful place to see, would world languages work in that modified schedule? Just take a look at that when you consider. So Jean Marie, our 6th question.
Yes. Our 6th question is, what kind of resources might world language teachers need in order to succeed, and might you also rely on in your planning? Well, there are national organizations dedicated to language learning and education, which we will provide you the links for in the accompanying material with this video cast. The first being ACTFL, the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language. Teachers can obviously join, and there are all kinds of resources on their site, including research on how language affects the other skills that we talked about, cognitive, academic, social, for example, that you could check out and investigate. There are links there to all of those. In addition, there are obviously statewide and or regional organizations. In Kentucky, we have the Kentucky World Languages Association, which helps to provide professional development opportunities for teachers, as well as ensure that they are networking. Because, especially with new teachers, the experience of a language teacher who's been in the classroom for a while, who's been working with how to get students through this inverted pyramid, who's ensuring that the goals are being able to use the language, not simply read a newspaper, but focusing on all 4 skills, is critical. So mentoring relationships, either with, as we already noted, ELL teachers or teachers who are already teaching another language. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same language that the person is teaching. For example, I've been mentored extremely well by people who didn't teach Russian because they were quality language teachers and they gave me skills. So these kind of resources are important not only for administrators but also for the teachers.
And remember, by attending conferences that ACTFL holds, or state associations, or even the regional associations like SCULT and WCOLT, there's tons of them, there's 5 regionals. When you attend these, your teachers are going to become more proficiency based. And when we say that, we mean, as Jean Marie was just alluding to, that they're helping the students be able to use the language in real world situations. They're not studying the language, they're learning the language to be able to use it. And that's proficiency based teaching, and that's what we want. We hope these 6 questions have helped guide you in your thinking of building a world language program, and we're excited. If you have any questions, always feel free to email us. My email is Laura, Laura.Roche, R-O-C-H-E, @fayette.kyschools.us.
And mine, since my name is hard to spell, is j.rouhier@uky.edu.
Thank you, and this ends our first Admin 101 for World Languages.